Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a fascinating source analysis that unpacks the incredibly complex web of the current Middle Eastern conflict. We'll be looking at the underlying U.S. political pressures, driving diplomatic moves behind the scenes, and finally, we'll shift our focus entirely to examine a deeply poignant cultural legacy. It's quite a journey, going from the harsh realities of global geopolitics to the fragile beauty of the human condition.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover Iran's red lines tested, the cycle of retaliation, the U.S. election factor, U.S. and Israel dynamics, and finally, remembering poet Bashir Badr. Let's get started.
Part 1. Iran's red lines tested.
So, to really understand this 100-plus day standoff, the source analysis notes that we first have to examine two non-negotiable boundaries Iran has drawn in the sand. First up is the maritime blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. The source notes that Iran has actually successfully enforced this, reportedly turning back 6 vessels, even destroyers, that attempted to cross without permission. And then there's the territorial red line, a strict demand for an end to Israeli strikes on Lebanon, which was supposed to be a core condition of the April 8th ceasefire discussion.
3,500. Now let that sink in for a second. According to Lebanese health officials cited in our source, that is the staggering number of strikes Israel conducted on Lebanon during that supposed ceasefire period. The source emphasizes that while Hezbollah was expected to halt attacks, Israel essentially maintained a continuous campaign. And this, ultimately, is what pushed Iran to enforce its stated territorial red line.
Moving on to Part 2, the cycle of retaliation. What happens when a red line gets tested? Well, the response is usually swift and uncompromising. This timeline objectively maps out the resulting domino effect, and it's pretty intense. It shows how an initial test strike by Israel in South Beirut on the morning of June 8th triggered a cascading series of multi-front retaliations. Within just hours, Iran responded by firing 10 to 12 ballistic missiles and drones. Then, 4 to 5 hours after that, Israel retaliated by striking 4 Iranian cities, including Isfahan and Tehran. But the cycle didn't stop there. Within 8 to 12 hours, Yemen's Ansarullah forces fired on Israel and announced they were reblocking the Red Sea. I mean, we're talking about a move that directly impacts global shipping lanes and the prices of everyday goods. The entire strategic equation was literally rewritten in under 24 hours.
Now, right after this rapid escalation, there was actually a brief announcement of de-escalation. But, as the source highlights, it was almost immediately shattered by a deadly Israeli strike on the historic Lebanese city of Tyre. We're talking 14 casualties, with reports indicating a significant number of paramedics were among the victims. Following this, the IDF chief issued a very stark warning. Any further Iranian response will be met with devastating attacks on Iran's critical energy and petrochemical installations. This sets up a massive, incredibly high-stakes test of will for Iran's next move, directly threatening the economic and energy stability of the whole region.
Which brings us to Part 3, the U.S. election factor.
Zooming out from the battlefield for a moment, we really can't look at this conflict in a vacuum. You just cannot ignore the ticking clock of the November U.S. elections. Look at these razor-thin congressional margins, a 7-seat gap in the House and a 6-seat gap in the Senate. The source argues that American politicians on both sides of the aisle are desperate to secure a decisive foreign policy victory ahead of November. The need to appease completely different voter bases, some demanding peace, others demanding unwavering support for allies, creates this massive domestic pressure cooker that directly impacts how the U.S. navigates the entire Middle East conflict.
And then there's the money. The source notes a truly staggering figure regarding the financial undercurrents of all this geopolitical chaos. It cites claims that Donald Trump and his family profited to the tune of $2.3 billion from crypto ventures right in the middle of this ongoing global economic and oil crisis. To put that into perspective, the analysis points out that critics use figures exactly like this to allege that financial motivations and domestic political posturing are deeply entangled with the peace process, complicating any genuine diplomatic efforts.
Let's look at Part 4, U.S. and Israel dynamics.
So how exactly do these domestic pressures translate overseas into complex and sometimes highly strained diplomatic relations? This quoted stance from U.S. Vice Presidential candidate J.D. Vance reveals a highly pragmatic, America-first approach to the Middle East. The source uses this to illustrate a growing willingness by some U.S. leaders to enforce strict boundaries, even with their closest allies. Vance is essentially saying that, hey, while the U.S. shares interests with Israel, ultimately American foreign policy has to serve the American people first, regardless of whether allied nations agree with the specific tactics or ceasefire terms.
Now, to contextualize this current friction, the source pulls up a really fascinating historical precedent from 1996. During a meeting to discuss a Middle East peace plan, newly elected Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly rejected the American proposal and instead proceeded to lecture U.S. President Bill Clinton. The source references Aaron David Miller's book, The Much Too Promised Land, to point out that this dynamic, where a smaller allied nation pushes back forcefully against a global superpower, is actually a deeply ingrained pattern.
It's a pretty jaw-dropping moment, for sure, and it's perfectly captured in Clinton's reported, highly frustrated reaction. The struggle to balance superpower authority with allies who have their own distinct agendas has literally been a persistent theme for decades. The source argues that American presidents frequently find themselves constrained or even seemingly held hostage by the political maneuvers of their allies. It really raises some fundamental questions about who is actually driving the policy decisions in the region. And finally, Part 5, Remembering Poet Bashir Badr. Now, after analyzing the heavy machinery of war, the shifting of borders, and the cold calculations of global politics, the source material takes a deeply moving turn. We're pivoting away from the harsh realities of geopolitics to a heartfelt tribute to Bashir Badr. It offers us a much-needed moment to just stop and reflect on the enduring yet incredibly fragile human condition. Badr was a profoundly influential Urdu poet who recently passed away at the age of 91. And what made his work so beloved was his ability to capture the simple, grounding elements of everyday life. He wasn't writing about grand wars, he wrote about the scent of wild mangoes, the rustling of village birds, and the shade of ancient trees. He wrote about the things that actually make up the fabric of a human life.
These beautiful lines have resonated with millions. They serve as a really poignant reminder of our own mortality and the immeasurable value of shared memories. It's a gentle, sobering thought that regardless of the massive empires we build or the battles we fight, the evening of life eventually descends upon us all in quiet, unexpected ways.
But there is a truly heartbreaking irony noted by the source. Despite living a long life and dedicating his entire art to immortalizing the concept of memory, Bashir Badr tragically spent his final years having completely lost his own memory to illness. The very man who wrote so beautifully about the pain of remembering lived out his final days entirely unaware of his own legendary status. He forgot his greatest works, his beloved poetry, and tragically, even the people closest to him.
As we wrap up this explainer, we're left with this profound juxtaposition presented by the source. On the one hand, we see nations engaged in relentless, destructive pursuits for geopolitical power, enforcing borders with missiles and endless political posturing. On the other hand, we see the life of Bashir Badr. Consider how the temporary, blood-soaked victories of nations ultimately compare to the enduring yet incredibly delicate art that connects us all. In a world consumed by power, what does the tragic loss of a master poet's memory teach us about what truly matters? What does it say about the fragile, fleeting nature of the human legacy we all leave behind? It's definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining me, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.